Today, we're going to be talking about a new concept in our ecology unit called succession. Our essential question for this unit is: how can you observe, record, and describe the role of ecological succession in a habitat? So let's first talk about what ecological succession is. Ecological succession is the gradual changes that we see in an ecosystem over time. There are two types of ecological succession: primary and secondary. We'll first talk about primary succession. In primary succession, there is bare rocks, there's no soil, so new earth needs to be created. So this would be like maybe where a volcano erupted and the lava cooled, or maybe even a bad rock slide. This case is where there is absolutely no soil for an ecosystem to begin. So the first stage is bare rock. In stage 2, the rock begins to break up from weathering. Plants like lichens, moss, algae, and fungus begin to grow on it. They secrete soil from their roots. What happens is they also break down some of that rock, thereby creating some soil. In the third stage, grasses will begin to grow. We'll start to see some insects and small rodents move into the ecosystem. Fourth stage of primary succession, we start to get small brushes and shrubs and things like that, and some smaller animals start to move in. In the fifth stage primary succession, we have small trees. These are not very big, tall trees with deep roots. These are just small, like saplings. And we start to see some larger animals move in when we have some of the trees start to develop. In the sixth stage of primary succession, we have a climax stage or climax community where we have very large trees. We have, along with our smaller animals, we have bigger animals coming in. This is a fully functional ecosystem, lots of big trees, lots of ground cover, things like that. In secondary succession, we still have soil in place. So this would be a time where maybe the ecosystem was disturbed by like farming or people cutting and burning trees down, or a forest fire or a flood has occurred. The key here is that in secondary succession, the soil has still remained. So it does not take nearly as long for secondary succession to happen as primary succession to happen, because soil doesn't need to be made. In primary succession, there is no soil remaining. So in the second stage of primary succession, all that would be left are very little plant life, very little, animal life, because it has been wiped out by the disturbance, but it renews itself much quickly because the soil is there. In stage 3, we start to see grasses and small weeds, things like that come back. We have insects and rodents return. In stage 4 of secondary succession, shrubs, small bushes, things like that return. We have small animals now return. In stage 5, we're going to have larger animals start to return. Small trees are returning. In the 6th stage of secondary succession, we have many trees. We have large and small animals. Those bigger animals that are at the tops of the food chain do start to return. Now, in both successions, what we have is it takes years for these changes to occur. But primary succession takes much, much longer than secondary succession. Because with primary succession, what happens is that the soil has to return, and we have to have soil return in order for plants in that to be able to take root. So primary succession takes a lot longer than secondary succession. And secondary succession can proceed at a much quicker rate because the soil is intact. So let's look at an example. On the notes attached, you're going to list the 6 steps that would help you or that would go along with this question. So let's say there's an area of a national park flooded and all the plants have died and the animals died or were dispersed. So they were scattered all over the place. After the water subsides, what would the 6 steps of succession be for how plant and animal life would be returned to that ecosystem? And then the last thing that you're going to answer is this question. What would secondary succession look like in a garden? So we have a garden there. We have an organic garden, meaning that we don't use pesticides and things like that in order to keep the bugs and the weeds away. It's considered a microhabitat because of the size and that it's different than the surrounding areas. I want you to think about and imagine what would happen if we would leave this garden go for 10 years and we didn't do anything with it. If we just leave it unattended, what would happen? And what would the steps in succession be? Be prepared to provide an answer. If you're at home, please make sure you're writing this down in your notes.